Hello, I am a Steam Deck. I haven't been released yet, and I am unfinished, and no one has actually reviewed me. Please wait for reviews before you get too excited and start.
I know what you're saying. And guess what? I love you.
I love you too.
It seems I found my community, and my community is beginning to find me. Shout out to Lifts for letting me use his awesome animation, and shout out to the Steam Deck Discord and the Steam Deck subreddit. They were both immense sources of information for the news I collated here last week, go check that video out. And of course, the same is true for my video this week. I also got a shout out from the subreddit, so thanks to y'all for noticing the work I'm putting in, and hopefully I can give you some more of that big deck energy here today. In fact, I have a bit of a banger here for y'all. Clearly, lots more devs received their dev kits, PC Magazine had their Steam Deck cover issue, and there were a few more tidbits throughout the week. So let's jump into it. First up, who got dev kits? Last week I mentioned Bennett Foddy, the tabletop sim devs, and a Japanese dev named IVR. Since then, we've seen tweets from Relogic, the developers of Terraria, Rivals of Ether dev Dan Fornes, Dave Oshry of New Blood fame, and No More Robots, who publish a few indie games including Descenders. That's not all. Phil Spencer at Microsoft tweeted about their dev kit, not to mention the various people or studios that developed the following games: X-Plane, Kingdoms and Castles, AudioSurf, Democracy 4, Hypercharge, and Pistol Whip. If some of those names don't sound familiar to you, and you're wondering why they got a dev kit, stick around till later in the video. I think you'll be surprised. With such a waterfall of information in the last week, a picture is really beginning to form around how the Steam Deck feels, sounds, plays, and performs. Most of the people posting seem to do so within the boundaries of the initial media policy I outlined last week, but there were some exceptions. There were people who were clearly providing performance information on games that they were not responsible for. And for what it's worth, I don't think that the most notorious of these people is even a game dev. It seemed more likely that they were dev adjacent, and maybe didn't get the media policy in full. Given that, Valve made sure everyone knew what the policy was. They posted the following clarification in dev forums. It reads, "As a reminder, our media policy is as follows. You are welcome to share photos, videos, and posts about Steam Deck Dev Kit hardware, so long as you keep it to your own title's gameplay. Please don't share media of the Steam OS UI, as this software is still undergoing work ahead of launch. Please don't share media of other games on deck as a courtesy to other game developers unless you have express permission. Finally, please do not share hardware with or talk to press about the Steam Deck Dev Kit." I'll stop there. I think this is an extremely reasonable media policy to have. We're still months away from launch, and every developer is entitled the opportunity to put their best foot forward, so good on you, Valve. Of course, that information is already out there, so I won't be covering some of it here. It's just important to note that performance will only get better from now until launch. With that, let's talk about what I said earlier, a picture really beginning to form around how Steam Deck feels and performs. I've organized the information around 5 topics: hardware, ergonomics, input, performance, and software. You can review the chapters and jump to a specific section in the description below. There's also a link in the description that contains an image album with sources. So, last week we heard about the sound being great, and Klifsky, the dev behind Democracy 4, confirms that here, saying, quote, "The sound is really good," end quote, really in all caps. That's good to hear. Una from IVR took their dev kit outside and showed us that the brightness is solid. This is at 80% brightness of that 400 nits panel, so this is looking good. Lion Shield Games dev posted this screenshot, which I thought was relatively uneventful, until the Fox came in and showed his superior knowledge. He quote tweeted this, pointing out that this dev kit does not have the anti-glare screen that the 512GB model will have. Very good sleuthing on the part of the Fox. That dev did come back later and give some good first impressions. He said, "The overall build quality is great, feels sturdy and well made. The D-pad, the buttons, the thumbsticks, they all feel good. Performance is also impressive, especially for a handheld." As for ergonomics, I'll start with some bad news. One dev in the Steam dev forums pointed out that their B button is sticking. They said it's sticking 10% of the time, which would be horrendous even if it only happens for a small fraction of users. If you've watched enough Steam Deck previews, you also know that the B button looks different from the other face buttons, so maybe that's correlated. Either way, this is one of those things that definitely needs to be addressed before launch. There was also a Discord member that got their hands on a deck, and they co-signed that this thing is heavy. They said it's extremely well balanced, much more comfortable than Switch, but it needs 2 hands. So you heard it here first. Your deck is a two-hander. Congratulations. On to input. That Discord member also said that the trackpads feel, quote, really responsive and don't get in the way. The rear buttons are perfectly placed, as are the triggers, end quote. They go on to say that the triggers do feel a bit spongy, but they expect that to be fixed in the retail version. Regarding the trackpads, Klifsky is in agreement. His tweet that I highlighted earlier also said that the, quote, paddle finger doodads work better than thumbsticks, end quote. It took me a minute to figure out what he meant, but I think I got it. Democracy 4 is a mouse-based game, so I think he's saying that navigating the cursor with the trackpad and clicking with the paddles is better than navigating with the thumbsticks and clicking with either L3, R3, or maybe even the bumpers. Keeping on the topic of mouse-based games, Mike Rose of No More Robots says they need to code in controls for Yes Your Grace, another mouse-based game. Technically, this shouldn't be strictly necessary since a user can use a Steam input to configure their own controls, or download a community profile. But I can imagine that a publisher might want the most streamlined experience possible for a user. If I'm a console-only player, I might be turned off by having to search for a community profile. Dave Oshry of New Blood Interactive showed off his dev kit, starting with a picture of a Medieval on screen with the caption reading Amid Gyro. He also showed off his two other bangers, Dusk and Ultra Kill, saying Deck Boys. So if you're looking for something to call yourselves, Deck Boys is an option. I'm partial to Deck Gang myself, but to each their own. I would have liked to hear more about the gyro. Obviously these games each have Steam input profiles using gyro, but I wonder if New Blood plans on doing something more official here, or even if they plan on including some of the nice console-oriented features that the Switch port of Dusk will have, like a weapon wheel. The flight simulator X-Plane also works. More importantly, it works with HOTAS joysticks, which is exciting for those that are serious about their flight sims. Rivals of Ether dev posted a video of the new beta build for Rivals working on Steam Deck, and this leads me to my final point on input. The PC Gamer Steam Deck issue tells us that one of the key Steam Deck designers is a die-hard fighting game fan, and that the D-pad, quote, rocks from the center. So Nihongo Gamer had an in-depth video about his concerns about the D-pad, hoping that it would have a pivot in the center. Take a listen.
It's actually fairly clicky. That's nice, but the main thing with D-pads, which tends to be an issue for me, is when a D-pad doesn't have a pivot in the middle. Now, I'm not saying that every controller has to have a pivot in the middle to be perfect, and maybe there are benefits to having a controller that doesn't, but, and this is in a separate video, for example, when I've tested in fighting games a character like Zangief, where you have to roll your thumb in a circular motion, if you do it too quickly and there's no pivot in the middle, you can accidentally activate like opposite cardinal directions, so right and left or up and down at the same time. And when you do that, you end up getting neutral, and that's not what you want to happen in the middle of a 3.
Well, he is definitely rejoicing now with this news that it does in fact have a pivot. On the subject of performance, Mike Rose says Descenders runs 50 to 60 FPS with ultra graphics. He was kind enough to post video of that. Ghibli99 says RE2 runs at 60 FPS on recommended settings with black bars, or 30 to 60 on ultra. Hopefully they can fix the aspect ratio and get rid of the black bars, but otherwise that's great news for this and other Capcom games on the same engine, like the beloved Devil May Cry 5. It also comes as a little surprise that Skyrim runs really well. It has a gold rating on ProtonDB, but specifically Ghibli99 says it runs 60 FPS, native resolution, with an auto-detected preset of high. We also got some hints about native Linux performance versus Proton, and the early lead goes to Proton. One dev said they know of 5 games, including theirs, that runs better on Proton than on native Linux builds. 5 games? So the whole Linux library then. I kid, I promise you. Sorry, Penguin family, soon I will be one of you too. The nice thing here is that Valve told the devs that they can specify Proton over natives, so the devs will have the option of what to recommend to the user. Finally, a few items on software. Una successfully booted to Windows 11 via microSD card. Someone on the Discord installed the SteamOS leak onto their laptop and quickly found that in its current state, it's very much tied to the Steam Deck hardware itself, saying that the SteamOS UI was looking for an NVMe drive, which the laptop he was using did not have. As they point out, and as I'll keep saying here, it's still very early and this will certainly get sorted before an official SteamOS 3 release. Another bit of news on software is that Valve discovered a previously used AMD driver on Linux that had performance issues. AMD then discovered more problems, and a new driver is now being designed, and it already has seen much improved performance and power efficiency. Thanks to Player924 for the TLDR on that one. The last thing I have on software is a patent filed by Valve and pointed out by the Expo. It seems this patent is for a unique way to allow you to begin playing a game before it's fully downloaded, one that wouldn't require the dev to opt in. This system would collect data about what files are read by the majority of people playing the game for the first time, and use that to determine which files should be downloaded first. This is just a patent filing, so it's more likely to go nowhere than not, but it's very interesting to see another console-like feature that could come to the Steam Deck. If you want to keep up with all the games that are Steam Deck compatible, it turns out a new Steam Curator has popped up. I'll share the link below. This Curator is including games based on who has dev kits and what games are being promoted in official materials. I think that's a really neat idea, so give them a follow. So, did we learn anything from Who Got Dev Kits? Remember how I said if some of the game names don't sound familiar to you, stick around, because you might be surprised. Well, I think I did learn something from Who Got the Dev Kits. Let's look these devs up on SteamDB. Let's start with Terraria. Most of us have at least heard of this game. It's wildly popular, and look at these legendary stats. 24,000 players right now, at this moment. That's insane. And look, it's also number 66 in the top sellers. I don't know what time frame SteamDB is using for top sellers, so by the time you look at this, the number might be slightly different, but number 66, that's amazing. Next is Tabletop Simulator, another wildly popular title, sitting at number 223 on the top sellers list. What else? Rivals of Aether, 323. New Blood, turns out their biggest game is Ultra Kill, and that's at 429. Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy is 400. Descenders by No More Robots is 585. X-Plane 11 is 640. Kingdoms and Castles is 925. And Democracy 4 was number 919, but today is 1050. Ladies and gentlemen, a pattern has emerged. These are all approximately top 1,000 sellers. But wait, you say, you forgot some. What about AudioSurf and these IVR folks, the Hypercharge devs, and Cloudhead, the makers of Pistol Whip? Are they top 1,000 sellers too? Well, no. I thought maybe AudioSurf was in there because they go back to the wee days of Steam, and IVR gives some Japanese representation, but mostly I couldn't find a pattern for these four. Then I remembered. AudioSurf was followed by AudioSurf 2, which was followed by the VR Perennial Audio Shield. So I looked to see what else Digital Cyber Cherries published in addition to Hypercharge, and lo and behold, they make new retro arcade Neon, another virtual reality mainstay. IVR is also a VR developer, and Pistol Whip is a VR game. Pattern number 2 has emerged. It seems Valve has prioritized the top 1,000-ish sellers, as well as the most popular VR devs. That seems kinda weird. Here's Valve in an interview being somewhat coy about VR working with Steam Deck.
Can I play VR off of it?
It has all the connectivity you would need to do that, but that's not really what we're optimizing the performance for.
So sure, it would work, it's a PC, but they certainly weren't in a rush to say break out the index and play VR on the deck. So what gives? Well, last week, Tyler McVicker put together a very informative video about Valve working on 2 consoles in addition to the Steam Deck, a traditional set-top box console and a standalone VR headset a la Oculus Quest. Check it out.
Valve actually has been developing multiple SteamOS-based units. There is the heavily rumored and possibly confirmed through recent reporting standalone VR headsets, but also found in this latest update is the denotation of something called the Steam console.
So, is this evidence that the guts of the Steam Deck could power their next headset? Could they be asking devs to test their VR games today on this dev kit? Is this completely wild speculation for absolutely no reason other than to pass the time? I'll let you decide. Until next time, wait. I almost forgot. I wrote something for y'all. You want to hear it? Here it goes. Like and subscribe, slap the bell to get notified, tell your friends it's a vibe. Deck Gang out. Goodbye.